Hi, Austin. This is Ira, and I'm recording here audio feedback on your statement of belief, which I hope will be useful as you're making your final revisions on your major essay for the course, Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts. And so, my feedback on the statement of belief piece is not really in the nature of evaluative or assessment feedback, but rather comments, questions, thoughts that I hope will be helpful to you as you're making your way through your final hours of work on the major essay for the course. So, in other words, what I'll be doing is reading back through this statement of belief, highlighting some spots where I think you're making particularly cogent arguments or good points, and also highlighting some spots where I think it'll be useful to think more systematically, or where I want to kind of challenge or push you a little bit for that major essay. So my goal here is to help you see by the light of this statement of belief some of the ways in which that larger essay should be rigorously theoretical or systematic. Okay, so by the time you get down to the question of what good argument is, after having sort of looked into its unavoidability, you end up saying that, let's see, where's this? On the one hand, and this is very kind of Jim Quarter, right? On the one hand, everything in our lives is at least partially a narrative. And then on the basis of that, concluding, I strongly believe a good argument is when both parties or both sides strongly take into consideration each other's personal narratives. And so your definition of argument really kind of starts from this idea that taking into consideration, responding to, being attuned to one another's personal narratives is the core or the basis of good argument. And obviously, I'm very sympathetic to that view, but I also want to challenge you a little bit here on a couple different things. First of all, just the both parties things. Just be careful to keep in mind. Often we say both sides, both parties, etc., but really a lot of arguments are multilateral, especially in digital contexts. So, in other words, often when people are arguing, there are many sides, 3, 5, 25, whatever. And so I want to just encourage you, as you're thinking about how argument unfolds in digital contexts and what it means for argument in digital contexts to be good, I just want to caution you to keep in mind that part of what you're trying to work through there is the multilaterality of argument in digital contexts, or at least the potential multilaterality. And you do actually kind of think about that in some ways going on below, but you also still are talking about it throughout this statement of belief in very kind of like both sides polarized ways. To be clear, again, the statement of belief itself is a good instance of what it is. I'm not criticizing that at all. Rather, though, I just want to make sure that you're thinking in the major essay about how we can have disagreement from multiple angles all at once, and how that might challenge some of the things you say later here about the best ways to have good argument. So I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But even leaving that to the side, this notion that argument starts from taking into consideration each other's personal narrative, if it's good. You say it's a must. It's not even that they should. It's a must. And I'm not sure if you mean must in the sense of logical necessity or must in the sense of like extraordinary moral necessity. And it'd be helpful to kind of clarify that a little bit. But either way, and given that I'm sympathetic to that view, or I kind of largely agree with it myself, I still want to encourage you to press on a little bit more and think about, okay, cool, fine. let's say good argument involves taking into consideration each other's personal narratives. But that's true for a lot of kinds of discourse, right? That's also true for a good conversation between two friends that's just about sharing, and it doesn't really have an argument in it. So what makes argument different from other kinds of discourse that are also about attunement to one another's personal narratives? What's the goal of argument? What's argument for? And you talk here about some ways of some ways of attuning to each other's personal narratives, and the difference between orienting towards speaking and orienting towards listening, and you focus in this kind of Ratcliffe-y way on listening as a way of constructing a perspective that meaningfully understands, or at least has some deep sense of our argument partner. So again, and that's all stuff that I like. I find engaging. I'm inclined to agree with, but also, what about the oppositional character of argument? Must argument be oppositional? And if not, how is it different from other things? And if so, how does that oppositional character at least trouble the immersing of ourselves and the listening, and so on and so forth? Now, when you talk about bad argument, you like maintain a nice consistency with what you thought was bad above. We speak but do not listen, and you talk about some instances where we're not engaging with, or where we shut down instead of engaging with one another's experiences and perspectives. And I think you're definitely right. We live in very, very polarized times in terms of public argument, political discourse, along a lot of different axes. But once more, what about all those spaces where there's actually lots of sides? So this is an example of bad argument that relies on sort of a two sides narrative. But what about when there's lots of sides? How does that change this, or how does that impact this? And also, why does it matter? Why must we listen to each other? Why is that important? What's the value of that for you? And again, I'm really not asking you to like tell me what you think I think. I mean, who cares what I think? The goal here is for you to keep on in this process that you've been on here, to keep on in the final moments of the course, working out that question of, okay, so these are things that you value. Why do you value them? Why do they matter to you? And you do kind of start to get to that point here when you talk about good argument helps us learn and grow. And so I think I would, as a reader, what I'd be looking for is a little more linking of these different things, right? So if good argument helps us learn and grow, how's that related to listening rather than speaking? How's that related to immersing ourselves in one another? And at the same time, how's it also related to that, contestatory or oppositional or what have you character of argument that makes it different from just regular conversation that's non-argument? You close here by starting to think through some of the stuff that's obviously the core or the core framework for the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts essay. You're thinking about how we become immersed in our phones rather than each other, and the difficulty of connecting on a more emotional level. And I'd be interested in a couple different things. One is, I love this idea that one of the things that we need to do is find ways that help us connect emotionally, that help us immerse in one another as persons. That's a very compelling idea of goodness in argument. And so the first thing is, I want to urge you to say more about that. Explain what's at stake in that and why it matters. Help us see what why we should value that, even when we're hoping to persuade each other, even when we're hoping to get our way. If this is such a good thing, why? And then in a corollary way, I kind of want to sort of challenge you to go beyond the set of solutions that you come up with here. I think they're interesting solutions and probably pretty successful in some ways. We should be trying to make some of our disagreements private. That's a very Corderian idea, right? That when we perform our disagreements for some audience, then we're not able to be deeply attuned to one another. We're not able to practice rhetoric as love, argument as emergence, right? I think what you're saying there, or at least I feel like I do. But I'm just from a pragmatic standpoint, given that we're going to continue to have millions of interactions where we aren't necessarily going as deep one-on-one, where we perform our arguments for some third party, somebody else's reading. Is there a way for that to be good, or must that always be bad? And if there is a way for it to be good, what does that look like? What is goodness in digital context in that way? Because essentially a lot of what you're saying here in this paragraph is really about sort of asking, how can we make digital contexts as close to one-on-one physical interpersonal communication as possible? I'm open to that. I think it's an interesting and in some ways very good strategy. But also I do want to say, but that's probably not going to be what's going to happen mostly, right? So isn't there a value to finding some way to seek goodness relative to what's most likely to happen, or no? If there is, what does that look like? If there's not, why not? Why is the thing that's at stake here sort of trump that? Anyway, so those are some general considerations that I hope you'll keep in mind as you're doing these final revisions that you're in the process of already. I hope this audio feedback on the statement of belief sort of helps you, jog some ideas loose in the final moments of the defining good arguments in digital context essay. Helps you think through your final revisions for that. I enjoyed reading this. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I look forward to reading the major essay. Thanks.